This is Screencast, chapters 1, 2, and 3, part 7. So we left off here with the question of who creates the art influences of the public's perception of the value of art. So who is that person out there that tells us that Michelangelo painting is worth how much? Okay, that's a question that a lot of people have when they're looking at art. And sometimes you have questions about, like I mentioned in the last video, why is that blue painting so famous when all it is blue? Sometimes we look at artwork that is new and innovative. Okay, we'll look at some of those here in a little bit, but sometimes it's that originality that plays into that public's perception. Okay, this particular piece is called The Polish Rider. And The Polish Rider, this particular painting, was bought by a couple who were an everyday couple who were art collectors, and when they stumbled across this piece, they thought they were getting a really great deal. It's almost like they went to a yard sale and they found a piece of art and they thought it was an original piece of art. So they bought it, and when they had it appraised so they could have it insured, they found out that they originally thought it was the artist named Rembrandt. A Rembrandt is much like a Van Gogh or a Picasso. It's that iconic name. So they thought it was Rembrandt's Polish Rider. Come to find out, it was not. So the price tag value of it changed quite a bit. It went from about 8 million to about 200,000 because it was actually a student of Rembrandt's called Willem Drost. And Willem Drost apparently can replicate Rembrandt just as good as Rembrandt, but not Rembrandt. Now, I understand how that could be frustrating for some people. Let's say if I won the lottery and I was supposed to get $8 million, I won $8 million, and I only get 200,000. I'm going to be like wondering, where's the rest of my money a little bit, even though it looks just like Rembrandt would have done it. So that person, that name of who did it, adds value to it. Okay, art has two intentions. First is to satisfy the artist, and then to satisfy the patron. So sorry, observers, we're all left out. But we have the artist making the work, and then we have the person buying or commissioning the work. Okay, what is considered to be art? If the primary motive for doing art is for the artist's expression and the secondary motive is for making money, it is considered to be art. Oh, that's kind of nice, but there's lots of types of art out there that is made and it's being commissioned, and the motivation for making it is art. Do you think the person who drew the first McDonald's logo would have drawn that McDonald's logo if they weren't getting paid to do that? Okay, so what is considered to be non-art? Things like illustration. Okay, so something that you don't know about me is that that was what I majored in college, was illustration, which is artwork that is done for print. So anything that you would see in your books, magazines, all of those kinds of things, those are not considered art. So that brings about famous people that you probably recognize, like the artist, illustrator, Norman Rockwell. I mean, who hasn't went into a dentist's office, a doctor's office, a pharmacy, and not seen Norman Rockwell prints or gotten a Norman Rockwell calendar? Which Norman Rockwell does that basic everyday Americana subject matter. So like this one here, for example, we've got this little kid. You can see he's about to get a shot from the doctor in his rear end. And that little boy is up there looking at his degree because we want to know they're qualified in what they're doing. So that everyday situation Americana. Norman Rockwell once said that if you stick a puppy in a piece of artwork, everyone will love it. So, that idea of that not being art because he was creating this stuff for money, that's kind of hard to take. So here we see a Norman Rockwell painting a self-portrait of Norman Rockwell looking in the mirror at Norman Rockwell. So one of the things I want to point out at this is sometimes you're going to see on tests and in quizzes that you're going to see who was the artist. Don't overlook the fact that a lot of times the artist's signature is on the artwork if you look for it. So here we have on the lower canvas, it says Norman Rockwell. So make sure you're doing that. That's kind of a newbie kind of mistake if you do not look to see if the answer's there. Okay, this is another one of those interesting Norman Rockwell pieces. That's Norman Rockwell taking a look at another artist who lived in the same time as him, creating these abstract expressionist paintings by Jackson Pollock. So kind of neat to see one artist looking at another. Art and beauty. So we've already kind of talked about this as far as aesthetics, and we know that it's different for everyone. So that means that you might not think that she is beautiful, but somebody does. Somebody commissioned this piece to be done. It could be somebody's mom, somebody's aunt, somebody's sister, someone's lover. Someone, you know, loves this person. Doesn't mean that we necessarily think that it's beautiful. Now, art in the real world. The expectations of most people is that the viewers want the art to duplicate the real world in appearance as closely as possible. So we like it when we don't have to, you know, struggle with what is that? You know, trying to figure it out. We want to be able to see something and go, oh, that's a portrait of, you know, the president. You know, it's one of those things that we want to be able to recognize what it is and understand what we're looking at. Now, this is a sculpture of Augustus of Prima Porta. Augustus of Prima Porta was a ruler that ruled for about 40 years. And at this particular time, they were, in Greek and Roman, they were really concerned with what is the ideal. So what does that mean? That means that their artwork may not necessarily duplicate what is actually there. They might make him better looking, better physique. All of those things might not be accurate because they're wanting something to be better than what it really was in real life. Now, this is artwork of the Middle Ages, and this is artwork that was dealing with more spirituality. So, you know, when you look at this, it may be decorative, but it's going to be more dealing with that spirituality in the Middle Ages. Now, during the Renaissance, they were dealing with naturalism as a goal. So they wanted things to look like what they really were supposed to look like. This being a Michelangelo sculpture, it looks like what that figure is supposed to look like. Okay, so naturalism, I mentioned that. Naturalism is doing it as you see it. That means flaws and alls, guys. So art can be categorized into three major styles, and I want you to be able to recognize these when you look at them. So there's representational, non-representational, and abstract. People have a tendency to kind of confuse some of these. People will automatically go, I like abstract art, but not really know how abstract art is defined. So we're going to look at that. So representational art is art that's actually, like we said, more like naturalism, realism, those kinds of things. So if you look on page 373 and 374, figures 16:9 and 16:10 in your text, you will see Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Doesn't get any more classic than that. But what we're looking at is we are actually looking at something that is realistic. So there's Adam reaching out his hand to God, that representation. Okay, so we understand what it is that we're looking at. Sometimes these three categories can be kind of fuzzed. That's where we start getting into the part of art that can be really confusing for people, and we call them the isms. So the cubism, surrealism, impressionism, expressionism, naturalism. You see what I mean? So I want to go back, like I said before, to those three major categories, the representational, non-representational, abstract. I want you to learn those first before you kind of go, I don't know what they're talking about as far as all those isms. Now, in this representational type of category, we have illusionistic art. That doesn't mean that, it's not going to be something that sometimes isn't hard to see. When you start looking at this Don Eddy piece, there's all different kinds of layers. There's a storefront with the shoes in it, but you have the window in front, which is reflecting what is on the other side. And then when you see through the glass, you see the buildings on the other side. There's all these different wonderful levels to this image. That's what we call illusionistic art. Okay, this photorealistic piece, this is Chuck Close's piece. Chuck Close's pieces probably went from floor to ceiling. That's how big they are. And when he painted, it was painting every hair, every pore. I don't care who you are, you didn't look good because it wasn't like, this all smoothed out makeup look. Every detail. We'll can talk about Chuck Close several times throughout the semester. Now, trompe-l'oeil art, sorry if I shocked you with that image, but trompe-l'oeil art means that it is art that is so real that it can trick the eye into believing that it really is real. So on page 32, figure 215 in your text, you'll see a sculpture of a painter. He looks real. This is not a photoshopped image. This is actually a sculpture that is, of course, with someone with their head up the rear end. I always think of politics and all of these things when I look at this. That's just me, but it's done really well. A lot of times people can't handle art that is this trompe-l'oeil because it kind of creeps them out. Things that look too gruesomely realistic, it's weird. Now, abstract art is art that embraces a broad range of approaches, but what they're really doing is they're taking and they're simplifying it. So when you look at this particular image, we're looking at figures, but we can't tell if they're male or if they're female. You can't tell anything else about them. We just know that they're figures. You are going to have an example of this kind of on your exam with these categories. You're going to have artwork that I'm going to put up, and it may be artwork that you've never seen before, and you're going to have to tell me through a multiple choice process, is it representational? Is it non-representational? Is it abstract? So make sure that you're paying attention to these, okay? Page 29, figure 213, there's an example of a painting by Picasso. Now, Picasso's giving you a little bit more information in that painting. There's a breast there, so you know that this person is a female, but it has been abstracted and simplified down so much that it's not realistic. It's just shapes. Page 33, figure 217, you also see a little sculpture there, and it's got a face poked into this kind of concrete little column kind of figure. Again, that's abstract. Now, we are going to jump to one that is kind of fuzzy in between those areas. After we look at, see here you have a couple of figures of sculpture. That's abstract. Here, again, like Picasso, we see some breasts. We see large hips. So we know that's a female, but it's still abstract and simplified. Now, this is somewhere in between the representational and the abstract, which is called stylized. Okay, so how would I suggest that you handle this on your test? If you see an image that comes up that's something like this, and it's asking you, is it representational? Is it stylized? Is it abstract? It's somewhere in between. If you give that option of stylized, go for it. Because what I mean by stylized is, look at those lion's eyes. They're circles. How did we all learn how to draw in the beginning? Basic shapes. A house is a square and a triangle, right? Well, breasts, they're circles with another little circle in there. So that's what I mean by stylized. It's almost like making things that are kind of cookie cutter looking. You can find this Henri Rousseau piece on page 69, figure 320 in your text. Now, non-representational art. This is artwork that's not supposed to resemble anything at all, okay? So the artist doesn't want you to say, oh, a sunset when you look at that. So these pieces are not supposed to look like anything specific. Now remember that when you look at it on your exam, you'll have an example and you'll need to identify it as non-representational. Okay, so we will pick up with expressionism in the next part.